Imagine walking into a room full of strangers. Before anyone says a word, before you even have time to consciously think, something in you has already decided who looks trustworthy, who seems confident, who might be interesting to talk to, and maybe even who you'd rather avoid. That's not you being judgmental in some moral sense. That's your brain doing what it's been designed to do for thousands of years. In fact, we know from psychological research that these first impressions can form in as little as a fraction of a second. Sometimes around a tenth of a second, for something as simple as judging whether someone looks competent. You're not sitting there taking careful notes and running an analysis, it's instantaneous. Now, there's a reason for that speed. Our ancestors didn't have the luxury of slow, careful evaluation in every situation. Imagine you're on the open plains thousands of years ago, and you see a figure in the distance. You can't take 10 minutes to decide whether they're friend or foe. You have to make a quick call. Do you approach? Do you run? Do you hide? The people who could make those quick decisions tended to survive longer. And that tendency, this mental reflex, has been passed down to us. So here we are, in the modern world, still relying on it, except now we're not facing saber-toothed cats or rival tribes. We're meeting potential employers, first dates, and strangers at a party. But the underlying machinery is the same. The interesting and somewhat uncomfortable part is that these snap judgments are largely unconscious. You might think you're calmly evaluating someone over a few minutes, but in reality, your brain has already made its decision and is now mostly collecting evidence to justify it. It's a little like a courtroom where the verdict comes first and the trial happens afterward. And that should make you a little uneasy, because it means that the stories you tell yourself about other people, especially in those first moments, might have less to do with reality and more to do with the shortcuts your brain is taking. Still, it's not all bad news. This rapid assessment can be surprisingly accurate in certain domains like detecting someone's emotional state or noticing subtle signs of confidence or nervousness. But it's also fallible, and those errors can cost you opportunities, connections, even relationships before they've had the chance to begin. Recognizing that you're making these lightning, fast judgments doesn't necessarily stop you from doing it, but it gives you a chance to hold them lightly, to question them, and maybe, just maybe, to let the other person show you something that your first impression didn't. And that's the paradox. We judge in seconds, but the truth about someone often takes much longer to see. When you make that instant judgment about someone, your brain isn't just guessing at random, it's leaning on a set of mental shortcuts, little cognitive patterns that have been built up through your experiences, your culture, and even your biology. Psychologists call this process thin slicing, and it means we take in a very small sample of information and then build an entire picture of a person from it. That sample might be the tilt of someone's head, the way they say hello, or the cut of their jacket. Your brain fills in the rest automatically, and you barely notice it happening. One of the strongest forces at play here is something called the halo effect. It works like this. If you notice one positive trait, maybe someone has a warm smile or speaks with confidence, you tend to assume they also have other positive qualities, like being intelligent, reliable, or kind, and the opposite is true as well, what's sometimes called the horn effect. One negative detail, like a limp handshake or a slight frown, can lead you to assume the rest of the person's character is equally lacking. The problem is that leap is rarely justified. You're building a whole personality profile based on a single point of data. Then there's stereotyping, and that's a tricky one because people often think of it only in terms of prejudice or hostility. But really, stereotyping is just the brain's way of trying to speed things up. You meet someone, you notice a few surface traits, and your mind pulls up a ready-made template for how people like that tend to behave. It's efficient, but it's also lazy. The brain loves efficiency, even at the cost of accuracy, and that means you might be carrying around assumptions that are completely untested against reality. And another subtle one, confirmation bias. This is when you've already formed an impression, and now you're only noticing details that confirm it while ignoring everything that challenges it. If you've decided someone is arrogant, every confident gesture looks like evidence. If you've decided someone is shy, every quiet moment reinforces your belief. It's not that the other side of the story doesn't exist, it's that your brain is filtering it out before you even realize. So, we think we're seeing the truth about someone, but in reality, we're seeing our own expectations reflected back at us. That's what makes these biases so powerful and so dangerous. They don't just shape how we see others, they shape what we allow ourselves to see. When you meet someone for the first time, your brain isn't taking in everything equally. It's selective. There are certain cues that carry far more weight than others, and they tend to be the ones that speak to us on a deeper, almost primal level. We pay close attention to body language, how a person holds themselves, whether they stand tall or seem closed off. We notice their facial expressions, especially the eyes and the mouth. A genuine smile, for example, doesn't just change how we feel about someone in that moment. It can influence our entire perception of their personality. And then there's tone of voice, not just the words, but the rhythm, the pitch, the confidence or hesitation that comes through in how those words are delivered. Clothing and grooming also make an immediate impression. Now, it's not about expensive suits or the latest fashion trends. It's about what those choices signal. Neat, clean, and intentional presentation suggests attentiveness, maybe even competence. On the other hand, appearing careless in those details, whether it's fair or not, often gets interpreted as a lack of discipline or self-awareness. The truth is, we're interpreting these signals because, historically, they've been tied to survival. The way someone looks could once tell you something important about their health, their social role, or their intentions. Those instincts are still with us, even if the environment has changed. And then there's the strange imbalance between verbal and nonverbal communication. You could be saying all the right words, but if your posture slumps or your tone wavers, people won't believe you. In fact, research shows that nonverbal cues can outweigh the content of what's actually being said. That's why someone who walks into a room with steady eye contact, open shoulders, and a calm voice is often perceived as more trustworthy and capable, even before they've proven it. We don't think of it as a conscious calculation, but those subtle details add up in our minds almost instantly. The danger, of course, is that these cues are not always reliable indicators of who someone truly is. A nervous person might fidget because they're shy, not because they're hiding something. A confident stance might come from arrogance as easily as it comes from competence. But because our brains are wired to prioritize these signs, they have a disproportionate influence on our judgments. That's the reality. We don't judge based on the whole story, because in those first seconds, we don't have the whole story. We judge based on the signals that shout the loudest. It's tempting to believe that first impressions are either accurate or completely wrong, as if it's a coin toss. But it's more complicated than that. Sometimes those initial judgments are astonishingly close to the truth. We can pick up on someone's mood, confidence level, or emotional stability almost instantly, because those things leak through in subtle ways. How they move, how they make eye contact, even the rhythm of their speech. If someone is tense or defensive, you can feel it before you can articulate why. In situations like that, your first impression can be a valuable signal, a kind of early warning system that something in the interaction needs your attention. But there's the other side, the times when those snap judgments are completely misleading. Maybe you meet someone who seems cold, and you assume they're unfriendly, but really, they're just shy or distracted. Or someone comes across as confident, and you mistake it for competence, when in fact it's nothing more than practiced bravado. This is where our cognitive biases start steering the ship. Once you've made that quick call, your brain starts scanning for evidence that supports it and ignoring what doesn't fit. And that means even when you get it wrong, you're likely to keep reinforcing the wrong story. Context plays a huge role here. Meet someone at a funeral, and you might think they're quiet and reserved when in another setting they'd be vibrant and talkative. Meet them after they've had a stressful day, and you might mistake fatigue for disinterest. Yet, most of the time, we don't factor in those variables. We just take what we see in that moment and stamp it as truth, and here's the danger: these inaccuracies don't just live in the moment. They stick if you meet someone and they seem untrustworthy. Even if you later learn you were wrong, there's often a lingering shadow of that first impression. The emotional residue of that initial judgment can be hard to shake. This is why some people never get the second chance they deserve. Not because they truly failed, but because the first narrative was so firmly set. So yes, sometimes your first impression will be right, and sometimes it will be way off. But what matters is whether you know the difference, and whether you're willing to question yourself enough to find out. Once that first impression forms, it doesn't just vanish when new information comes along. It lingers, sometimes for years, shaping every interaction that follows. Psychologists call this the primacy effect, the tendency for the first information we receive about someone to carry more weight than anything that comes after. It's as if our minds write the opening chapter of a story and then become reluctant editors, unwilling to make major changes even when the plot takes a different turn. Think about it in everyday life. In a hiring situation, the initial handshake, tone, and first few sentences can set the stage for the entire interview. If those first moments communicate competence, the interviewer is far more likely to interpret later stumbles as minor slips. But if the first moments suggest uncertainty or awkwardness, even strong answers later on can be overlooked. The early impression has already framed the lens through which everything else is viewed. The same thing happens in personal relationships. That first date, first meeting, or first conversation sets an emotional tone. If you start with warmth and authenticity, people will often give you the benefit of the doubt when they see your flaws later. But if the first exchange is marked by discomfort or misunderstanding, every later interaction has to fight uphill against that initial impression. This is why misunderstandings can be so stubborn. They're built on that foundation you laid in the first moments, whether you intended it or not. And this isn't just about how others see us. It works in reverse. The way you first perceive someone can dictate how you treat them, and that, in turn, shapes how they respond to you. It can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. You meet someone, decide they're difficult, treat them with a bit more distance, and, surprise, they respond in kind, confirming your original belief. You never really gave them the chance to be anything else. What's unsettling is how rarely we challenge these early judgments. We move forward as though that first impression was a factual report, not a subjective snapshot taken in a very particular moment. That's why so many relationships, opportunities, and collaborations never reach their potential. It's not that they were doomed from the start. It's that they never escaped the gravitational pull of those first seconds. And once that gravity has you, breaking free requires more than just time. It requires conscious effort. If we accept that people are going to form an impression of us in seconds, then the question becomes, what can we do about it? The answer isn't to put on some artificial mask or pretend to be someone you're not. People are surprisingly good at sensing inauthenticity, and when they do, the impression you leave is far worse than if you had just been yourself. The goal isn't to fake an identity. It's to present yourself in a way that allows others to see who you really are before their biases and assumptions fill in the gaps for you. It starts with the basics. Posture, for instance, communicates far more than we like to admit. Standing or sitting upright signals confidence and attentiveness, while slouching can read as disinterest or insecurity. Eye contact matters, not the unblinking stare of a predator, but the steady, natural gaze that says you're present and engaged. And then there's the smile, A genuine smile isn't just about moving the muscles in your face, it's about the emotional state behind it. People can tell the difference between a forced grin and one that comes from genuine openness. Your voice is another tool you carry into every first meeting. A calm, steady tone, free from unnecessary rush, communicates self-assurance and makes your words easier to absorb. Speaking too quickly can signal nervousness, while speaking too slowly can make you seem unsure of your thoughts. You don't have to perform, you just have to be intentional. Even small preparations make a difference. Thinking ahead about what you want to communicate, dressing in a way that's appropriate for the context, and walking into the room with clarity of purpose all contribute to that initial impression. People often think these details are superficial, but they're not. They're signals, and in the absence of a deeper connection, signals are all someone has to go on in those first moments. The point here isn't to obsess over every gesture or word. If you do that, you'll become stiff and unnatural, which defeats the purpose entirely. Instead, it's about aligning your outward presentation with your inward intentions. If you're genuinely curious about the other person, if you want to connect, if you're willing to listen, then your body language, tone, and presence should reflect that without contradiction. Because in the end, a first impression isn't about creating a performance. It's about making sure the truth of who you are is the first thing people see,